Gynecologists, what's the most horrific thing you've ever seen? Bon appetit! Gynecologist here. I've come across some unpleasant cases, like when a girl walks around with the same tampon for days, even weeks. Necrotic vaginal cancers aren't exactly a pretty sight either, but those don't even come close to the worst case I've ever encountered in my life. One day, a 19-year-old girl came to our clinic. She complained that a hairspray cap was stuck in her vagina. Well, I thought, that's not a big deal. Naive me. The catch? She'd shoved it in there when she was 15. That's right, 4 years ago. She didn't explain her reasoning. You could tell she was deeply ashamed. Even before she undressed, you could smell this absolutely horrific stench. It got so much worse when I started examining her. The cap had been inserted edge up and, over 4 years, had become nicely overgrown with vaginal tissue. Getting it out was complicated by the fact that it had pierced both her bladder and her rectum. It took several major surgeries to remove it. I'm not a gynecologist, but I know someone who recently had a hysterectomy, a full uterus removal. Anyway, this girl had stitches in her vagina that needed time to heal, but she was so desperate to get back to her sex life that she couldn't hold off and gave in. As a result, her small intestine prolapsed out of her vagina. They told me every detail, so much that I don't think I'll ever be able to eat ground meat again. According to the girl herself, as she was being rushed to emergency surgery, she could feel the intestine lying across her legs, pulsing. How do you delete someone else's comment here? Back in high school, I had a friend who was terrified of going to the gynecologist. When she finally worked up the courage for her first pap smear, she got so nervous that she clamped the doctor's head between her legs like a vice. She said it took a while before she could relax and let the poor doctor go. Awkward as hell. She laughs about it now, of course, but that shyness about her lady parts, still there. Funny thing, she can't stand tampons either. I'm a med student. Once I volunteered to assist during a hysterectomy. They told us it was a minor ovarian cancer case, but when we got in there, it was way worse. The patient's insides were riddled with metastasis. We spent 13 hours just trying to reduce their size, when the whole surgery was supposed to take 3. At some points, we had help from the general and vascular surgery teams. We ended up replacing half her blood volume. After everything she went through, she was in rough shape. The recovery was long and brutal, but somehow she pulled through and went home to her family. It was exhausting for all of us. The patient and her family, though, they were amazing people. It was an honor to help them. I'm not a gynecologist, but I do exams sometimes. Once, I pulled out a tampon that had been in there for at least a month. The wild part? She'd been having sex the whole time. The smell was pure hell. After she left, it took hours to air out the room. We just wandered around the clinic, trying not to puke. My dad told me about a woman with a hardcore heroin addiction. For some bizarre reason, she decided to get creative one day and injected herself into her labia. It led to gangrene. Worth it, I guess. I'm a bit late with this one, but here goes. Med student, full-fledged doctor in a few weeks, though not quite a gynecologist. During my Gyno rotation, they sent me to examine a woman. As I prepped for the exam, the room smelled so bad I thought I was in for the worst bacterial vaginosis I'd ever seen. I go in, start checking. Nothing unusual, no weird discharge. Strange. I pull back, and the farther I move, the stronger the smell gets. Turns out her feet just stank like death. I highly recommend checking out Dr. Lisa Rankin's book, WhatsApp Thunder. There's a section where she talks about the worst cases of her career, like finding maggots, money, you name it, but that's small potatoes. The best one was about a woman who grew a potato. Check this out. Guess what? So, this woman decided to use a potato as birth control. And since potatoes love warm, dark, damp places, it started sprouting. She ended up with potato shoots dangling out of her vagina. I've got a story, not gyno related, but just as revolting. In high school, I joined a student group that sent kids on internships. I chose the ER. One day, they bring in this really obese woman. Complaint? Chest pain. We all notice this awful stench coming off her. The doctor decides she needs a wash before we check her out. He cleans her, lifts one of her breasts, and this reek hits us so hard we nearly pass out. Under her breast was a colorless patch. He washes it, the crust comes off, and there's this little hole. Then cockroaches start crawling out, probably eggs laid in the folds under her breast. When they hatched, the roaches couldn't escape, so they chewed their way out. My mom had a story I think beats every hospital tale I've ever heard. A patient came in, around 50, massively overweight, 500 pounds. She walks in and says, "My husband complained about a weird smell during sex." Thing is, it wasn't just her husband who smelled it, the whole hospital did. I don't recall all the details, but her vagina was in full necrosis. Surgery was needed, but it didn't save her. She died soon after. The best part? Her husband was the first to catch that hellish stench, right in the middle of sex. I'm not a gynecologist, but I've seen some wild stuff. First, a woman with vaginal cancer. Then what was left after they removed her vagina and cervix entirely. Not a pleasant sight. I can't detail the procedures. I was just a young student then. But in the end, all that was left was a big, hollow hole dripping something. The poor woman was so devastated she begged her husband to leave her, saying, "You'll never love me after this." But he was a champ, stayed by her bed, held her hand, comforted her, poured love into her. You could see the guy adored her. Second case, a 485-pound woman with lower body paralysis. She had a massive ulcer and necrotizing fasciitis that destroyed everything around her genitals and buttocks. Her rectum had erosions. We knew because feces were leaking from damaged patches. When they asked us to get a urine sample, we found she didn't even have a bladder anymore. Or a vagina? Just a mess. They tried patching it up somehow. After washing her, they rolled her onto her side and started stuffing gauze into this giant hole. Hope she didn't crap herself during it. She died fast. We're powerless in cases like that. Can't forget that first girl either. Hope she's happy now. I feel sorry for everyone in this thread, readers included. I'm not a gynecologist, but I was born with a defect I ignored until I started using tampons. Turns out I had a septum, giving me 2 openings instead of 1. I only realized something was wrong when I couldn't get a tampon out once. I'd put it in through one hole and tried pulling it out through the smaller one. It got stuck. Not excruciating, but I couldn't fix it. Luckily, my mom was nearby. She thought I was just an idiot who couldn't handle a tampon. Then she saw the issue and took me to a gynecologist. They operated, no problems now. Not a gynecologist, but I saw something wild in the ER. An elderly woman came in after a fall. We check her out. Huge vaginal and pelvic cancer. Looked like someone glued 2/3 of a soccer ball to her. The tumor was so big it pressed on her left leg's nerves and blocked blood flow. That's why she fell. No idea what happened next. They were still working on her when I left. Hope they sent her to hospice. At 80, with a tumor like that, chemo, radiation, or surgery just don't make sense. I'm a nurse in a gyno ward. Oddly enough, I don't see much gruesome stuff. Women here are pretty meticulous about their vaginas. And honestly, the vagina's a tough organ. It can handle a lot of misuse. Worst case I had was a woman in for a hysterectomy. During surgery, the surgeon messed up and sliced her intestine. They paused the operation until it could heal, but it didn't go as planned. It never healed right. Soon, the cut fused with her abdominal incision, forming a fistula leaking waste. A wound spilling feces isn't easy to close, you know. She ended up stuck in the hospital for 9 months, tons of infections, wound ruptures, hour-long dressing changes, the works. At one point, that fecal wound was so huge I could have fit both my fists in it. They ended up giving her a permanent colostomy, a poop bag. Last I heard, they never removed her uterus. Well, thanks to your stories, I'll never feel ashamed about unshaved legs or a bikini line at the gynecologist again. A couple years back, my buddy was a gyno intern. One time, a young patient came in with 2 complaints. She couldn't get pregnant and she had constant diarrhea. The gynecologist asks, "How often do you have anal sex?" She says, "Always." Turns out her boyfriend convinced her it's easier to get pregnant that way than the usual route, so she told him to only go in the back. A story from my gynecologist colleague. A girl comes in for a checkup, climbs into the chair. He slides his fingers up to her cervix. Then this genius question pops into my head. Ever think this feels like stuffing a Thanksgiving turkey? My colleague, trying to keep a straight face, goes, "No, but now I'll think about it every Thanksgiving." The patient cracks up, looks him dead in the eye, and clucks like a turkey, while his fingers are still inside her. My favorite Thanksgiving story. My grandma was a gyno nurse for 20 years. One day, she stormed home furious, yelling, "If I have to look at one more vagina in my life, I'll kill someone," smashing every dish in the house. She quit the next day. My mom's a gyno assistant, so I've heard plenty of stories. Once, a woman walked in stinking like a dumpster. Turns out she'd been wearing the same underwear for 2 months. They were dark yellow-brown. Guess no one told her you're supposed to wipe your ass. My first gyno visit was weird as hell. I was super nervous, and I got this old hag who clearly noticed. To lighten the mood, she says, "Well, you're lucky you didn't get a male gynecologist. Their fingers aren't fingers, they're friggin' sardines." Then she shoved her wrinkly old granny digits in me. Big thanks for watching. In the comments below, gynecologists can share the worst things they've ever seen. Don't forget to check out our other vids. Oh, and by the way, bon appetit. See ya.